there's no such thing as bad posture. By fixing that could cause issues in other areas of your body.
Yanisa Chaikhot, how would you define the differences between osteopathy, physiotherapy, and a chiropractor?
Chiros work from the inside to fix the outside issues. Physios would work out and in. Osteopaths would see the whole body as a whole.
What advice would you give someone going into osteopathy?
Those who are worried in the moment, I need to know everything now. Like, you really don't. Like, eventually it does come, but you just have to start doing something.
A specific challenge that you have overcome.
It was a challenge, but looking back, it was a really positive thing for me because...
Welcome to Curating Life Lessons. Today we have Yanisa Chaikhot. Yanisa is a third-year osteopathy student. She's going to tell us why she chose osteopathy, her advice for students going into osteopathy, and she's going to give us a number of tips and tricks and lessons on how to prevent injuries and heal your body. Yanisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Why did you want to become an osteopath?
So it all started with my dad, actually. So he had a very chronic back pain that he wanted to solve. And he's seen many practitioners, chiropractors, physios, doctors, so like GPs. And eventually, so he would tell me the stories. And eventually he would go through them, and then they would provide temporarily like relief until he came across someone who was like, go see an osteopath. And then that's when he went to see one, and within a couple of weeks his symptoms were massively getting better from someone who would be on all fours, like struggling to get up, to now walking pain-free. So that story always stuck with me. And that's when I started doing my sports, and then I would get injuries. I would go see like a physio. And my dad was like, well, why don't you go see an osteopath? Because at that point then he goes to see an osteopath like once a month for like management for his back. So when I injured my ankle, I sprained my ankle in a basketball game. So I went to see a physio, and they just gave me some relief, which was good. And I was like, oh, I want to be a physio. And then I went to see an osteopath as well. And it allowed me to sort of compare the two professions, both very different. But I think as an osteopath, as a patient who saw an osteopath, it was more relatable to me. It felt more like they really truly understood the whole of the body. And at that point I was like, yeah, this is what I would love to do. And it must feel rewarding to, you know, really find that root of the problem, whether what it is, because it's a more holistic sort of like approach. Yeah.
So then, you know, the key question on everyone's mind, how would you define the differences between osteopathy, physiotherapy, and a chiropractor?
So I actually listened to this podcast done by previous osteopathy students, sorry. And how they described it was chiros tend to be someone who work from the inside and to fix sort of like the outside issues. And then physios would work sort of like out and in. And osteopaths would see the whole body as a whole. So all very different approaches. But chiros, for example, and osteopaths, with our knowledge, we're able to make diagnosis. Whereas if you go see a physio, they can't make a diagnosis. So you would oftentimes go to a GP and have some sort of like symptoms of injuries, and the GP themselves would refer for you to go see like physios or physical therapists. They are treaters based on whatever conditions you're diagnosed with to help manage and rehab. So I would say that's the key differences. But ultimately, like, we all want to help people. So there are techniques where they overlap. So I would say like massage techniques or sort of manipulative techniques like joint manipulations. So the cracking that you see in chiros, like we all are able to do that. And we're also all able to sort of do external training outside as well, like sort of like for complementary and alternative therapy. So cupping, acupuncture. So these are all external sort of training courses that we can take as a professional, to bring to the table and find what's best for each patient, because ultimately everyone's different. So yeah.
Interesting. And a question that came in my head as you were speaking was, what would you say are some of the attributes, as in like personality attributes, of someone that becomes an osteopath?
Um, I would say that, well, based on what I see in my university and the type of people that do undertake this degree, they're all very sort of like aware of their own body. They're very like in tune with sort of like very active individuals, and wanting to explore more about the body, and how like just very curious minded individuals, and but still open-mindedness, because osteopathy is such a new sort of like field. It's only been around for 150 years. So in this field, like we're still sort of like exploring different ways that we can bring to better our treatments and whatnot. And so I think like these sort of like individuals, we're trying to find a new outlook in like a medical sort of treatment for people, especially for people with chronic conditions and pain, how we can manage that and not using medicines or medications. So that's the sort of like things that we do.
Interesting. And 150 years seems like a long time, but apparently not. Would you?
Not really. No, I mean, I don't know how long physios or chiros have been around actually, but yeah, it's supposed to not be around. So, I mean, like, let's give a little stats. By the time I graduate, next, which is in 2026, 30% of osteopaths are going to be retiring.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. That is quite a big stat, actually. Wait, so within like essentially like a year and a
Yeah.
half, what's driving that? Like, do you know? Is it simply because?
Yeah, so it's a very slow growing field, I would say, and osteopaths have only been recognized by the NHS about 2 years ago, maybe. So I think that like even now people still ask me, what's osteopathy? And they can't say it. So it's like
I could barely say it on the
yeah.
start of the intro.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a very known field. And that's why even in my course, there's only less than 50 people in there. So not a lot of people know about it. And that's why like there are so many job opportunities for us. But when they kick-started off, like there weren't that many around at all. So now I think like hopefully there'll be, with the recognizing by the NHS, there'll be more people becoming interested in this sort of field, and then it will grow eventually. Yeah. And that's also essentially personally why I chose it, because I was like, it's such a newer field and it probably would allow me to sort of be creative with it as well.
Interesting.
You
Okay,
know?
what does that mean in terms of be creative?
So sort of like you get physios who have been highly trained and specialized in sports or in sort of like chronic pain management. But with osteopaths, you don't hear a lot of sports osteopath. So instead of like a sport physio, which is, I mean, I'm just talking out of my mind, very competitive sort of field. I want to get into like a sports osteopath, like bringing a new specialization into osteopathy itself. So that's why I kind of chose it.
Interesting. Okay, I like that. So it's like creativity in terms of the direction that the whole field could go in.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
And that's hence why my previous degree was in sports medical science. So I'm hoping in the future I could bring something to osteopathy as a career and specialize using my knowledge in my previous degree to sort of like make my own pathway and have my own definition of osteopathy.
Makes sense. And then what would you say were some of the key misconceptions that you had going into the field that through your training has maybe challenged the way that you thought about the profession?
So the key things were like, I think at some point when people say it's a holistic approach, it's a whole body sort of like experience, you think, oh, someone's lying there and we're just waving around a sage stick, like voodoo sort of things, you know? But what really shocked me was how in depth the anatomy and physiology that we had to learn was. Like, I think one of my professors who teach me anatomy, he used to teach medicine students. So I would say that osteopathy is on par with medicine, and actually our requirements is more than nurses as well. So I think that was not a big shock, but it's like, yeah, I really need to gear up because our whole concept of osteopathy really depends on our knowledge and the solid foundation to know the structure and function of the body really well, to create ultimately like as accurate diagnosis as possible. And secondly, I would say what is interesting to me is how we really rely on palpation. So it's like touch. So a lot of times, like, and this is where the difference is between chiros and physios are as well. Chiros, their ethos is all very like everything comes from the spine. So hence the spinal manipulation that they do, because that's where illnesses are stemmed from. And then physios may rely on tools like electrotherapy, hydrotherapy, ultrasound. But osteopaths, we're very hands-on. So in a consultation, we will ask you to sort of like just doing some movements, and we will just observe how your body is moving. Are you weight bearing a certain side more than the other? And then just touching, this sounds weird, but just palpating your body to feel how the texture of the joints, the muscles, and that is such a big finding. So it's very like qualitative sort of like findings, and that we could essentially make to distinguish whether something is wrong in that area or not.
Interesting. How has that changed how you like look at the human body? With my question kind of coming from when I was the patient of an osteopath ages ago, it was like a problem with my like clavicle, shoulders, and they were doing something with my arm. And she kept commenting, she was like, you know what, people often forget how heavy different limbs are when you have to like do the manipulations. So how does that kind of your view of the human body and different parts of the body, how has that changed with the palpation element of it?
Yeah, so I would say the palpation itself is such a skill that you continuously learn as an osteopath. It's like I can see the changes from first year to this year now, in terms of before I'm like, I can't feel anything as I was just sort of like using, because we work on each other in our class. So I'll be like, oh, I can't, I guess the shoulder feels a bit crunchy. No, not really. But now you can't kind of feel more. So I would say that like with the heaviness and everything, I think everyone is different. And you're not really shocked, but you can sort of feel like so for example, I work with healthy bodies in my class. Everyone, like, we're young, we're healthy, so we're not able to gather evidence versus someone who actually suffers from an injury or a pathological like problems. So that changed when I started working in my uni clinic, and people with actual sort of like injuries, you start to feel a bit of restriction there at end of range, like their range is not moving as much or anything like that. And the weight of the arm could be an indicator based on, you know, their body weight and whatnot, but I would say it's so many other factors like just the feeling of the joint, the muscles, of everything working like as an integration, I guess.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And then now the human element of it, almost like the professional to patient kind of relationship. How do you go about navigating that? How would you make someone feel comfortable? All those kind of psychological elements that come into it.
Yeah, so I would say that in osteopathy, like we really sort of focus on the biopsychosocial model. So yeah,
Biopsychosocial model.
biology, psychology, and social sociology.
Maybe.
Yeah. So essentially, I would say, unlike other fields, we sort of interlink all these aspects into like asking our patients and then taking that information of it all and come up with like a long-term sort of management for them, like what they do, who they are is a huge factor in like determining their recovery period, and also how they can be managed and their lifestyle changes, so we have things of flags. But in terms of making patients feel comfortable in an appointment, I would say that just sort of having the professional boundary, but being friendly and just being active listening, because these people who come to see osteopaths, they're in pain. So sometimes you have to ask a lot of open-ended questions, and at the initial consultation as well, you'll be shocked at how many questions we ask at first to really get an in-depth understanding. So a lot of medical previous history questions, things that you might find a bit like, why did you ask that? Like stool. You'll be like, okay. So frequency and whatnot. But this all, it's an indicator of bowel habits. And bowel habits is also an indicator of health, right? Because it's the waste and byproduct of an organ. So an indicator of whether that organ is functioning well. So things like that sort of will help you understand if there's anything that is wrong and if this could contribute to their injury now or their recovery. And so, yeah, did that.
No, that makes sense. 100%.
Yeah.
So you're now in your third year of the osteopathy, and you did your sports medicine degree before that. What advice would you give to two different people? The first one, someone going into sports medicine, and then second, someone going into osteopathy education.
Yeah, so actually my degree was called Sports and Medical Sciences. And I did in Exeter. It's like a combination, a hybrid, which at that time only King's College and Exeter did it. Very new sort of field as well. Oh, I'm just a sucker for new fields. But for sports and medical sciences, I didn't want to specialize in osteopathy right away. I always knew I wanted to do it after high school though, but I was like, ooh, but what if I just invest 4 years in it and then halfway through I don't like it, and it's like I can't do anything else with a degree. So I had a long chat with my parents and say, look, I want to go. I'm obviously very keen in this sort of like rehab, sports, like med side of things. I just don't know what I truly want yet. So sports and medical sciences ultimately include the biomechanics side of sports, nutrition, sports psychology, and physiology and how it relates to athletes. So we used to do a lot of like lab work, like with VO2 max, and then we'd also do a bit of like medicines as well. Sort of the
quick question.
Yeah.
Have you tested your VO2 max?
I did, but I forgot.
Okay, how did you find that whole test? What was that like?
It was very like interesting because the lab that we used was also if I'm not wrong, it's the same lab they used for a Nike athlete who was a marathon runner, and it was like who was the first one to do it under 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was it, or maybe 1 hour. I'm not sure. But so the equipment and everything, I think it's sort of like, well, for someone who was doing it, like it looked like very hard, you know, they're like sweating in there. But testing it, because we have to use the blood test, and then we also then test their heart rate, ECG and everything. And then I think afterwards the results kind of help you know where you are at in terms of comparison to your age group, or if you were to be training for like a certain event, where you're sort of like at in your journey of training, and whether you can heighten that even more.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. How often in osteopathy would you look at like other aspects of health, like for instance, like blood test results, things like that?
So
I'm particularly thinking like hormone levels, electrolytes, that sort of thing.
yeah, so I think that depends on the patients you're seeing. So there could be a patient that comes in who have signs of inflammation. So for example, arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, can actually have inflammatory markers, results based on a blood test. And in order to kind of diagnose our patient with rheumatoid arthritis, we have to have this external tool where they go and get like a scan or a blood test to reaffirm our diagnosis for that. And essentially that will help us then tailor our treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. So inflammatory markers are a big sort of like thing in osteopathy, because it helps us understand what kind of treatment we can do, and also their recovery sort of like picture as well, because if you have a lot of inflammation going on, it may take a little bit longer. And then we might focus on more like blood flow and lymph circulation to help with that inflammation.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, and now drawing back to advice for those two different people, what would be the advice?
Yeah, so the advice for sports and medical science students is that I think it's a great field to go in if you have a broad like interest in sports or how the body works without having a full depth of like medicine, because I really liked the nutrition side of things as well. It was very interesting, lots of papers with interesting findings. And I think that like after having done this degree, it made me think of which sort of aspect, sort of field do I want to specialize my career in. So I think that was a sort of like good, solid foundation to set a path that's right for me. But at the same time, like I still have a little bit of knowledge in the other fields within that, which I can sort of like have a conversation with someone about, you know. It's just, I like learning new things. So it's good for people who want to learn about new things and not have like a tunnel vision.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And where would you say, what different avenues did your peers in that degree go down? Do you know?
So do you mean like where do you sort of specialize in one things more,
or in terms of people that you actively knew and studied alongside? If you know you're still in touch with them, what kind of avenues did they go down?
Okay. So with sports medical sciences students, some of them went into, so one of my friends now, she's worked with a female football team in researching about menstrual cycle in relation to sports performance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have knowledge around that? Like, how does it work?
I think it still needs to be researched more. It's a couple years back now, but I'm just trying to remember. I think at a certain like sort of phase in your cycle, you are more prone to like perform a little bit like lower for your standard, and that's where, you know, all the other sort of aspects come in, like nutrition and whatnot, to sort of like keep up with the performance. You're never going to be at your peak. And also I think the key is finding at what state in your cycle will first like lower your performance, and at what state will you perform at your best. So I think that's still being researched on. It's very gray at the moment, but it's exciting for our field now because I think there's more people like being curious about this. And I think now as well, she's gone to work with a more like, because she did a whole degree under like FIFA association. And then so now she's working with a female soccer team, I think.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Interesting. And now taking a step to osteopathy specifically. So
for first year osteopathy students, even I can't say it. Sometimes I struggle a bit. For first years, I would say that advice would be to just go in and enjoy and not put too much pressure on yourself for not knowing. Because I remember I felt a lot of pressure seeing all these third and fourth years. I'm like, how do you know so much? Like, where do I even start? And, you know, you have to start from things like, what are the bones in your hands? And you're like, I'm never gonna remember it. But like, eventually, I think I learned the most from clinic, which I started in third year.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And why do you think that is? Is it that, you know, the constant practice / repetition, so it's like going in your brain, or is it because it's kind of, you know, it's no longer from a textbook, it's like in the real world, so your mind has something to attach to? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Like, I would say that from the textbook, yeah, it's like you can memorize it and do great in an exam, but you're never truly gonna remember it in a long term. So, but by doing it, you're continuously thinking and applying it to like a problem that somehow makes it stick better. So now I'm like, yeah, I can tell this is like this bone and this joint is this joint. But whereas in a textbook, I'm like, yeah, the carpal tunnel, yeah, you know. So it's when you actually see it and touch it and feel it, I feel like using all those senses that you're given, it makes it stick better.
Makes sense. And I'll ask this question at the very end to wrap up around advice for your younger self.
Yeah.
But it was interesting when you were saying advice for early osteopathy students around, you know, some element of it was like, don't stress too much. Which from like all the YouTube podcasts that I've done so far, that is probably the most common advice that someone has given to their younger self.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think that because also everyone has so many different ways of learning. And when you're, you know, unlike my other university where I would be occasionally surrounded by people doing other degrees, I'm in a university now where it's just osteopathy. So you're surrounded by other people who may learn faster than you, you know, or they have other ways of, maybe they have more time. So I think the best way is to just, I think first year, my biggest one was I was actually learning how to learn. I was trying different ways in like flashcards, notes taking on laptop, on hands. And it's like a trial and error. So, but it's like I knew in myself that I just need to keep going and keep doing whatever you're doing. Just start on something and eventually it will come around. But I think I could understand and empathize for those who are worried in the moment. I need to know everything now. Like, you really don't. Like, eventually it does come, but you just have to start doing something within that.
Cool. I like that. You have to start doing something. And the experimentation mindset.
Yeah.
And for you personally, what worked? What did you find worked best?
Yeah. So I think now coming to third year, what works for me is when I go in a lecture, I have a pre-prepared lecture notes from the slides in my OneNote. I use OneNote. And then while the lecturer is talking, I'm like, I have all these points And if they were to add any additional points that weren't on the slides that I think is important, then I would just add on to those points and like have it in another color or something. And then at the end of the day, I will go back and then sort of read through that. And when it comes near the exam period, I would, because I remember best when I write things down, I would then take out a notebook with a pen and then start just basically copying my notes and like just saying it out loud while I'm doing it. And sometimes in an exam, I'm like, okay, what does this mean? What's hypothyroidism and what's the symptoms? And it's almost like I can see a table that I wrote down.
Oh, I like that.
So
That's
it's
cool.
like, that's what works for me. But then I have other friends who use like actual skeleton to sort of like memorize. And some others prefer sort of like watching videos. So different types of learning. But I think the most important is find what works for you in first year, and then eventually things will start getting a bit easier.
Makes sense. It's funny that you mentioned speaking or saying it out loud. That was one small thing, not even small thing, quite significant thing that for me at university and actually just throughout life has been like a useful way to remember stuff, is like when I'm learning it as I'm like cooking food or I'm like in the shower, I'll always have like almost have like a conversation out loud. And I think sometimes it's actually quite difficult to have a full-blown conversation when you're not actually speaking to someone. And I think being able to do that is for me a good way to like memorize things.
Yeah, I think so. Some of my friends, I mean, it's not even just about memorizing. I think people just talk to themselves on a daily basis. Yeah,
me trying to justify speaking to myself. Yeah.
Just getting your thoughts out sometimes it's good. And I think also just saying it out loud as well, you might like start thinking about new ideas. So, but yeah.
Cool, 100%. And now, before we move on to part 2, do you have a specific challenge that you have overcome in your life that you would like to speak about? Could be physical, mental, social, or something else that you would like to speak about.
I would say after I graduated from high school, I kind of struggled with like mental health for a little bit. It's almost like, I don't know, like I just lost like identity sort of crisis moment. And I feel like that was really tough while, because then COVID happened as well. And then I was at university and I couldn't go home because I lived in Hong Kong at the moment, during that time. And it was tough with the whole quarantine and obviously money issues. So I stayed in the rented house in Exeter and everyone was gone. So I think like that was like the tough period where I had to stay headstrong and just sort of like trying to find ways to earn more money alongside my study. So that was tough as well when I started to working at a part-time job in a restaurant and then studying at the same time. Definitely put a lot of pressure. But now, like thinking back, I only stopped working part-time this year, actually. So I've worked part-time from second year of my bachelor's degree till last year. So about like 4 years, I would say. Because I knew that this year I have to I'm almost ending my studies and I want to do it properly and do it right. But talking about that, it was a challenge, but looking back, it was a really positive thing for me because I was someone who never had a job experience before, and going in this hospitality business was like a great way to first learn about the culture and the people and everything about this country, and secondly, the sort of interaction that I have with guests in the restaurant is what I could reflect and take away for patient interaction. So yeah, coming back to your previous question where how do I make patients feel comfortable? Honestly, I think I learned that skill and became comfortable with patient interaction through years in hospitality of working with such a diverse clientele. I've worked in 4 different restaurants, so it's kind of like it made it easier to sort of interact and communicate and sort of like sussing what kind of person they are, and yeah, it just became easier.
I like that. It's really strong. And if you could distill that into a single sentence or 2 sentences in terms of what was the key life lesson that helped you overcome that period, what would it be?
Some things may seem hard during that moment, but if you take it one step at a time and experience that hardships, you go back to the future and start sort of seeing how many things you took for granted, and you actually appreciate the little things more later on. So like working during university was hard. Why do I have to do it? Some people don't have to do it. But now I'm like, crap, it has like, sorry. It's like, it has like some
Sorry,
benefits.
You can say fuck or whatever. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, it's like, it has some benefits to what I'm doing now. You know, you go through hardships and you're so blinded by it in the moment that like tear you down, that you have no idea how it could become beneficial in the future.
I like that. That's really cool. It's really cool. And now wrapping up this first part of the episode, what would you say is the advice that you would give to yourself 10 years ago?
Ooh, wow. Very deep. 10 years ago. The advice I would give to myself is keep headstrong, and, you know, whatever path you choose, something will come out of it, whether it'll be a lesson or it'll be a success story. Just make a decision. There's never right and wrong. Yeah, I guess.
I like that. It also kind of reflects some of the other stuff you've spoken around, having this kind of experimental mindset and like trying things rather than necessarily being stuck in analysis paralysis or something like that.
Absolutely. Control the controllables.
Control the controllables. Interesting.
Yeah.
And now thinking about yourself in 10 years' time, what advice would your future self give to your current self?
I think honestly, chill out.
Yeah.
I think she'll probably say that like life will somehow work out in the end. As long as you have a goal you're working towards, have good intentions, like good things will come.
Cool. Goal you're working towards, good intentions.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. And what is your favorite quotation right now and why?
It's control the controllables.
Control the controllables. Okay.
Yeah, I tend to say that a lot because sometimes I'm such a like an OCD person, and I'm like, oh, this has to be this way. Oh, like why is this happening to me, sort of things. And actually, it's just like just control what you can and stop stressing about things that are out of your hand. You know,
Makes sense.
It just creates more problems.
Okay, so challenging question there. How do you decide what is controllable and what is not? Because there are some things that are in the gray zone where you're like, you know, is this within my sphere of control, or is it outside?
So I would say like, I mean, it's very subjective, but I think what most people can agree on is like controlling your own emotions, or like your own actions, your own behaviors, and your responses to like what others are sort of like inflicting on you. It's like being able to control that response to the best of your ability. The uncontrollables could be like other people's response to your behaviors, or like it's raining. You know, you can't control the weather, you can't sort of like the external factors and other people. As long as you're sure of like who you are, finding ways to control your own emotions, I think that's such a great way to sort of like be stable and be calm. And I think that's also a good way of not sort of preventing further regrets in the future. Yeah, I guess that's
Cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. And now going into the second part, what would you say are your top 3 tips for someone in their 30s or 40s to prevent injury?
First tip, just going outside. Because I think there's a whole idea even behind osteopathy as well. I forget the name that it's called. It's helio something. But basically it's about the fact that going outside, how weather changes your sort of like hormonal levels and your mood and everything. So sort of like being in touch with nature like can help that sort of like mindfulness psychological aspect of your psychological health. And second tip would be people always say go to the gym, stay active, but not everyone likes the gym, and that's fine. So what I tell my patients is this is where it's so important for osteopaths to look into the biopsychosocial model, because you ask questions about what are your hobbies and things like that to understand what they like to do. And if they're like, oh yeah, I used to like swimming, and you'll be like, well, why don't you get back into it again? So staying active through the things that they like. Even gardening is staying active. So yeah, just finding things that you like to do and being active doing it. And then third, making lifestyle changes if necessary. I know that some people are sort of like born with certain congenital diseases, then understanding it better and making relevant changes that could manage whatever they have. And for people who have perhaps adopt, some habits along the way in their lifestyle that they know, ooh, that's not so good, then just taking a first step to step back and analyze if this is something they should be continuing to do. Because as we get older, our body's sort of immune system decrease. We don't have that adaptive capacity anymore. So as a young person, you might be able to go out party and then you don't have a hangover. When you're older, you do. So it's kind of like that example is also everything else that comes with illnesses later on as well. If you can just, take out any fixable sort of like factors in your life that you can take out that is not so healthy for your overall body, then just try to take some sort of action for that and accountability.
I like that. That's solid. And now thinking about common mistakes people make when looking after their physical health and their whole muscular-skeletal structure.
Common mistakes. I think common mistakes is people, this is what I've learned in my osteopathy course, and that will always stick with me. And my lecturers will always say that there's no such thing as bad posture. So
interesting. Okay, I'm really keen to explore that. Yeah.
So actually, you're told by your parents, your teachers, sit up straight and whatnot. But everyone actually is born differently. And throughout the years, your body has adapted to however you're born with. So if you were to try to change that, structure that was given to you at birth, then it might actually cause more problems in the long run. So things like flat-footers, like, we're deemed as, I'm a flat-foot, having problems with your plantar fascia, so the sort of like tendons at the end of your foot or fascia, and you have like calves problems and you have to wear the shoes. Yeah, it sort of like it helps, but you shouldn't like try to fix and not become a flat foot. You just kind of find ways that will be more supportive for your arch. So because fixing it means you make other changes along, because it's a chain. So by fixing that, you could make changes to like your knees and your gait and how you're moving, and that in itself could cause issues in other areas of your body.
Interesting. That reminds me of something I saw around Simone Biles, the
Yeah.
gymnast. I was looking at like stretches for like hip flexors, and got onto this like YouTube video where it was talking about how tilted back
Yeah.
her hips are, and like
Yeah.
actually, she is a peak athlete, and she has that tilt, so maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing. What
Yeah.
would you think about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see that it's not necessarily a bad thing because she's a high performing athlete
Yeah.
already. So it's kind of like, um, so it's called like a lordosis, right? Some people may have an excessive lordosis, and that could be a contributing factor to that injury. But if they're able to move pain free and do all of this throughout their life, it's not like something that should be fixed. You should really focus on that is a contributing factors, but are there also issues in other areas of the body as well? So perhaps for her, having that lordosis means maybe work on her core because it counterbalances the extension of your lower back, and having that strong core will help support that lordosis. So that's why there's like antagonists and agonists, sort of like muscles. So if you have,
What does that mean? Those two different types?
so like quads are knee extensors, and then hamstrings are knee flexors, right? So so the quads would be an antagonist to the hamstrings or vice versa.
Gotcha, gotcha. Like good and
Yeah.
evil, like light and dark,
Yeah,
kind of
like
yin and yang.
biceps and triceps. So by sometimes people have muscle imbalance in these like muscles. So your biceps might be stronger than your triceps, and issues can actually come to the with that as well. So also as osteopaths, we can establish that and then sort of like then recommend the patient to, there's a little bit of like imbalance between this. That's why you feel a little bit tightness and sore all the time, like around your joint area, because one muscle is working harder than the others. So yeah, finding the balance really. So I would say that with anyone with different postural things, it's good to acknowledge it, and then if ever it causes pain, if you go see any profession, like, it doesn't have to be an osteopath, physios, chiros as well. Having that insight to your body you can then make relevant changes, because it's not necessarily the area of pain itself. It could be coming from elsewhere.
Makes sense. Makes sense. What would you say are the top two muscular-skeletal imbalances?
Top two would be, I would say, the hip flexors and also like the lower back as well. So for example, some people work a lot on, let's say, them on a desk, so they'll be leaning forwards like this, right? So that's when your hip flexors shorten, and then your hamstrings are being lengthened for a period prolonged time. Hence why, like, when you bend over, if you're standing up and you try to touch your toes, like you feel tightness in your hamstrings, and then you have like sort of like pain coming from your hip flexors because it's constantly being a shortened state, which is like not how it's designed to really be. Like both sort of need to be around the same length. So having that imbalance, you have to correct it by doing stretches and, just going for a walk, exercise, like standing. That's why people always recommend like take a coffee break, just walk around maybe, because it will prevent sort of like further imbalances.
Oh yeah, I once heard an
Yeah.
expression which is the best way to, or the best sitting position is the one that you're moving out of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I haven't heard that one, but that's a good one. I'm gonna
Nice.
start using
Okay.
it.
Glad I can add that to the mix.
Yeah. Yeah, so with some patients as well, I've seen, my older colleagues have sort of suggested a standing desk, because some people, it's certain factors that we can't change in patients when they're they have to work and be at the computer all the time. But you can change your desk setup. The ergonomics of your chair, your desk, they all have relationships in your body. So being able to observe the patients, their posture, the way they move, could also help indicate are you sitting in a chair that is designed well for you, or maybe you need to just stand more. So then promoting like standing desk. And I think most of the time people actually get positive results from it, because osteopaths can only do so much in a treatment session. It's what you do outside that will continue to be beneficial to you in the long run. So making these changes is it's called patient autonomy. So,
Patient autonomy.
Yeah. Gotcha. So you get the patient pain to a point where they can then take it outside and taking accountability for themselves and not relying on osteopaths to treat further symptoms. And that is when you know your job's done.
Makes sense. And then what would you say to someone who's maybe sitting at home looking at videos on YouTube about osteopathy and is wondering if they need to go see an osteopath?
So I would say that if you do have a problem, if you're wondering if you should go see an osteopath, just go see an osteopath. I think it's also a good way to sort of explore the profession itself as well. I think it's never a bad thing to find new ways to sort of like having your body being examined by. So because like with each profession, I don't think anyone should like see a practitioner and let that be sort of like a blanket experience for that one profession. You should always like try to go see multiple ones and then come up with your own conclusion, what's right for me. So like the example about my dad, he's seen so many professions before osteopaths, and then osteopaths was the right thing for you. But then other people actually prefer chiropractors. It's not a right or wrong answer. And I think if you're curious, go see one. And when you actually get injured, you'll be like, yeah, I think I will go see the osteopath now.
Gotcha. So if you are a patient going to see an osteopath, what should you expect?
So in the first consultation, you'll be sat down and the osteopath will ask you sort of like a list of questions. It's very tedious, but it's all essentially very important for us, whether you think it's relevant or not, to establish how everything is interlinked and whether these could be the possible cause for your symptoms. Unlike when you go to see the GP first, you're sat down for 10 minutes and then they're like, right, tell us your symptoms, and then they may just discuss one and then refer you on to a specialist. Whereas with osteopaths, it's very in-depth. If you said you had so-and-so in a past history, they'll ask more about that. They'll be like, when was that? How long did it last? Have you overcome it? What was your management plan? All of those give like ideas of if there's something else that could be occurring in as well. So as osteopaths, we will also identify like early red flags. So if you come in with like an ankle injury, we'll still do a systemic overall question of your health to rule out any sort of like things like codo equina, where you're
What's that?
So it's where your spine actually sort of like is completely squeezed and then you are paralytic.
Oh, man. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like ruling out the most extreme cases.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Or ruling out suspicions as well, and being able to identify whether you should refer your patients. I mean, I'm still studying it. There's so many that it's very, like, for example, diabetic patients. If someone who's not diabetic and they are not aware and they haven't got themselves checked up, but they have family history, or they're going to wee more often, they get an increase in thirst, like all of that is an indication. And to be able to know if the patient has that or not, again, helps you sort of like understand their immune system better. And then, yeah, so there's so many more. But I think being able to see if treatments is right for you, basically we're safeguarding the patients, and getting for them to also receive the best treatment. So if we think it's the best to refer, then we would just write a letter to GPs and then be like, look, based on this findings in the appointment, I would like to refer this patient for further investigations. Please let me know if it's a good idea.
Okay, final question. In your view, what is the link between mental health and physical health?
So the link between mental health and physical health would be, so we learn about this thing called pain science in our degree, and your mental health state is a big indicator of how you perceive your pain. So that's where it is such a big topic to consider for managing chronic patients. So I would see it as like a sort of your mental state. If you're constantly stressed, anxious, catastrophizing, all these things from your brain is gonna send signal to your body and give you a physical reaction. It's basically like an amplifier. So we call this central sensitization.
Central sensitization.
Yeah. And that's basically the top to bottom reaction. So your body has two sort of like highways. So it detects tissue damage. So let's say you stub your toe and you're like, ow. So your body is sending the one signal that goes up the ascending pathway. And your brain is like, oh, crap, there's damage there. And then they release inflammation, telling you that there's pain to basically prevent you from like damaging anything further. So it's a good thing. But the problem is if you struggle with mental health and this is happening for a prolonged period of time, the signals can get mixed up. So the top down signal, your brain is now turning up the volume and might tell you that the pain is there when actually it's not there. So I would say that with these type of chronic patients, that's why it's very important to sort of look at other approaches as well, like incorporating mindfulness or exercises or lifestyle changes, because these things can help change sort of like the mental state of your patient and ultimately fast in recovery. Yeah.
Cool. I like that. Super strong note to end on. Yeah. Yanisa, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Cool.